Welcome to Exact Training. This lesson is on the Inventory Control module and creating cycle count transactions. So why do we do cycle counts? It helps us maintain inventory accuracy through regular cycle counting. A good cycle counting program can negate the need for physical inventories. The easiest way to enter beginning on-hand inventory balances is to cycle count the existing stock and enter it into the system using the cycle count transaction. You can either enter each cycle count as an individual transaction or use the grid at the bottom of your screen to enter several or all cycle counts and process them all at one time. Let's get started learning to create cycle count transactions. These are the steps we'll follow. From the System Manager, we will choose the Inventory Control module. We'll go to the Activity menu and choose Transactions. We'll go to the Cycle Count tab. To show costing fields, first we'll turn them on in Preferences. Begin here in the System Manager and select the Materials tab. And choose the Inventory Control module. From there, choose the Activity menu and select Transactions. The Transaction window appears. This lesson is on using the Cycle Count tab, so choose that one. In the Transaction window, there are three main panes. The upper left has the Transaction tabs, the upper right has the part stock information, and the lower pane is a grid that we will use to display the parts that are part of the query. Before we dive into the module itself, there are some default settings that you should know about. You can see these by clicking on the Options menu, then on Preferences. These preferences are user-specific. In the Preferences window, you can decide which items to appear on certain screens or reports. If Display Costs is marked, the Cost Unit field displays on all transaction tabs except the Transfer tab. Also, Unit Cost and Extended Cost columns display on the transaction grid. When Display Due Quantities is marked, the Balance Due field displays on selected transactions tabs. Also, the values displayed in the Transaction Grid Quantities column after a query match the value displayed in the Balance Due field for each order. When Display Due Quantities is not marked, the Balance Due field does not display on the selected Transaction tab. A zero value displays in the Transaction Grid Quantities columns for all line items after a query. To display on-hand quantities on the Cycle Count tab, mark the checkbox next to Display on-hand quantities in the Cycle Count box. So if you want one of these items to appear, you will need to place a check mark in this window. Let's take a look at the results of configuring these settings. We will go ahead and place a check mark in each item. Once the checks have been placed, click OK. Then close the transaction window and reopen it so the window can refresh with your new choices. Now back on the Cycle Count tab, you can see the effect of our adding those check marks. These fields were not appearing before. They are showing now because of the check marks we added to the Preferences window. In the lower portion of the window, the Transaction grid, there are now columns for the cost information. Now let's talk about cycle counting. Cycle counting allows you to verify inventory accuracy constantly by counting the on-hand inventory of a few parts at a time and comparing the counts with MAX inventory balances. MAX tracks all cycle counts that are performed and their accuracy level and prompts for cycle counts that need to be done. Cycle count prompts are based on part information entered by MAX users on the Part Master Inventory tab. For more information, see the lesson on the Part Master Inventory tab. You can either enter each cycle count as an individual transaction in the upper left pane, or you may enter multiple transactions at one time using the cycle count grid. You will then click the Process button after entering the cycle counts and highlight the lines you wish to process. Your initial query can ask for information in part number or stockroom order. You can also perform all of your cycle counts for the day and then process all changes at one time by using the grid. If you only want to see those parts which have not been counted within the planned cycle time based on the cycle count frequency code, mark the exception box. On-hand quantities displayed in the pane to the right of the transaction tabs compare cycle count quantities with displayed on-hand quantities. Highlight any rows that contain differences and then process the cycle count quantities using the grid. This corrects the on-hand balances by reflecting how many parts are actually in stock. So let's enter a single part cycle count. Enter the part in the Part ID box or browse for a part. By double-clicking the Part ID field and then clicking the Search button to view currently entered parts. When you find one you'd like to use, double-click the row. Now enter the stockroom you are counting for this part or double-click to select it from the browser. And click the Search button. If a stock ID is already showing, you can erase that one from the selection field by selecting the Clear button. And then clicking again on the Search button to look for all available codes. Enter the zone the part is in, if applicable. Enter the quantity of the inventory counted for this part. The General Ledger Reference field allows you to offset the cost of any differences in the on-hand and the counted quantity from the standard GL accounts to an override account. Double-click to go to the browser. Click the Search button to see all available codes. When you find one you'd like to use, double-click the row. The Reference field allows you to enter additional notes about this transaction if you wish. Let's look at the Cycle Count Percentage field. This value defines the acceptable variance range of parts on hand for the cycle count. For example, if the current on-hand quantity is 100 and the allowable cycle count tolerance is 2%, over or under, then a cycle count quantity of 97 pieces or 103 pieces would exceed the maximum allowable cycle count tolerance percentage, and a message saying "Warning, out of tolerance" would appear during post-cycle count update. The system keeps track of the number of cycle counts for a part that were out of tolerance, as well as the total number of cycle counts for the part. This information is printed on the cycle count exception report. If the field is left blank, the system assumes 0% tolerance and will display warnings if the cycle counts are off by any amount. If you don't care about the tolerance, enter 100%. This field is similar to the cycle count tolerance percent, except that the limit is stated in dollars. For example, the cycle count tolerance might be set at $100. If the amount shown on the cycle count were less than 100, no warning would be produced. If the cycle count amount fluctuated by more than 100, over or under, a warning would be generated to help ensure an accurate physical inventory count. If the field is left blank, the system assumes $0 tolerance and will display warnings if the cycle counts are off by any amount. If you don't care about the tolerance, enter $9,999. The system keeps track of the number of times that a part has been cycle counted and the number of times that the cycle count has shown the part to be out of tolerance. If you have never run the Recalculate Cost Rollups program, or have not assigned costs per unit for each part, then the system thinks that the cost of all of your parts is 0. Therefore, no cycle count will be out of dollar tolerance. If you wish to maintain this tolerance, you must enter costs for your parts. This is an optional entry. These user-defined fields will display up to 15 and 25 characters respectively. To complete the cycle count transactions, press the Process button. If the quantity entered is not within the cycle count percent tolerance or the cycle count dollar tolerance for this part as entered in the Maintain Inventory Part Data, the error message, "Warning, quantity greater than tolerance," is displayed. The warning is created if the difference between the old and new on-hand balances is greater than the cycle count tolerance percent, or if the value of the variation exceeds the cycle count dollar tolerance. The transaction may be posted even though it is greater than the accuracy tolerance levels. This warning is an indication that the transaction deserves extra attention. The cycle count exception report keeps track of the number of times that a part has been cycle counted and has been found to be out of tolerance. Parts that are always out of tolerance deserve extra attention. If you have made changes to this window but decide not to keep them, press the Clear button. Now let's try one from the grid. You can enter a range using the Start and End fields. Select the Search button to see all available part IDs. Use the scroll arrows at the right to move through the list. When you find the item you'd like to use, double-click to add it to the Starting Range field. Enter the ending range in the same way. If a stock ID is already showing, you can erase that one from the selection field by selecting the Clear button. When you find one you'd like to use, double-click the row. Once you have chosen a range, select the Query button to display the information. You can now see the parts for cycle counting and can enter the count quantities. Hit the Process button to save the counts. If you use lot serial tracking, any variances between the counted quantity and the on-hand quantity will trigger the lot serial dialog box to open. You will need to select the lot serial number to remove or enter any new ones. If we only want to look at the ones that are scheduled to be counted, then click the Exception checkbox. And query again. Follow the same steps to process the cycle count. To remove any query results from the grid, select the Clear button and the items are removed from the grid. When you are finished updating the cycle count transactions, you may close this window. Select the Activity menu and choose Exit. And you will be returned to the System Manager window. Today you have learned about the Cycle Count tab. We have discussed what it is used for and how to create a cycle count transaction. Thank you for participating in Exact Training.